Can a clock hold secrets from beyond the veil? And would you dare to use a Ouija board in a house you know is haunted and that you have to sleep in every night? Hi, it's me, Madame Strangeways, back with some new, true, spooky stories for you. And as always, solicited or not, usually not, I share my thoughts and observations after each spooky tale. Now, it's time for you to dim the lights, get cozy, and maybe even get yourself a little snacky snack while I read you these true, strange stories here on Madame Strangeways. The Anniversary Clock by Tim. I was 10 years old, watching TV with my older sister, who was in her early 20s, who would often babysit me while our mom was out of the house. It was just another benign evening when a small anniversary clock, a clock about 12 inches tall, all encased in glass, with a small brass fixture at the bottom, caught our attention. The clock had been in our family for years, and as long as I could remember, it never worked. The clock stayed on top of the TV as more of a decorative piece than anything, as were a number of other things, as this was in the 80s, where big, boxy TVs took up large spaces in the living room. Anyway, my sister and I were watching TV when suddenly we both noticed, simultaneously, that the hands on the clock started moving. Slowly at first, but accelerating quickly until it was hard to make out which hand was which. After about a minute watching the hands spin, bringing the clock back to life for the first time in decades, the hands came to a jolting stop. My sister, being the brave adult she was, examined the clock and found no batteries inside. It wasn't plugged in or anything, and both of us were totally mystified at what we both experienced. When our mother returned later that evening, we told her everything and were met with some skepticism, as one might expect, not having seen it themselves. The next day, my mother received a phone call from a distant relative. The call was to inform all of us that our great aunt, one that had been really close with my sister early in her childhood, had passed away the day before after a short illness. Saddened by the news, we also couldn't help but link the passing to the abnormal experience the night before. We asked our mother what time our aunt had passed the day before. She said 5:30 a.m. We raced over to the clock where there, clear as day, the hands stopped at exactly 5:30. In another circumstantial twist of fate, 15 years later, I would end up meeting my future wife on May 30th, 2005, or 5:30, and ended up getting married on May 30th, 2009, or 5:30. Tim, thank you so much for giving me permission to read this heartwarming story. Unexpectedly heartwarming and odd and strange and possibly unexplainable. I do think my grandparents had that exact same anniversary clock, and I don't think it ever worked. So what's up with that? But I, that would be so scary watching that happen while you're watching television, just minding your own business. And then the hands are moving so fast that you can't even tell which hand is which. And there's no battery inside and it's not plugged in. And that's crazy. That would be so scary. And of course, we see this as a common thread between a lot of these stories is parents dismissing what their children have seen. So I'm sorry that your mom didn't believe you, but I'm sure after y'all learned about your great aunt's passing, I feel like she probably came around. I wonder, your sister, who was really close to your great aunt, I wonder if she felt more scared or more comforted, or like would be the case if that happened to me, I would feel both. I would feel scared and comforted. Comfort, scared, scare. It's not scarefruited. I think it would be both. That'd be really scary. And, how else do you explain that? I can see, look, batteries power things. Yes. You take the battery out of something, generally it doesn't work. That doesn't mean that there's not some, juice left in the thing. However, I'm imagining that clock has not had batteries for quite some time. So probably unlikely that there was any clock juice left, except for potentially some ghost juice in the clock. Now it's a ghost clock. Did one of y'all keep the clock? Did the clock just stay there for forever and now you don't know where it is? That's just so sweet to hear. Also that 5:30 then also applies to meeting your wife. Well, going on your first, meeting your wife and then marrying your wife. Aw, that's so sweet. Time is strange. Time is really strange. And I think typically, like I've said before on the show, typically when you hear crazy stuff happening with time, people do associate it with aliens. I think in this case, aliens probably didn't have anything to do with it at all because it wasn't lost time. It was ghost time. The ghost of your late great aunt. Late great aunt. Late great aunt would imply it was an aunt. You got to do the double great because you do the late great aunt. So thanks for sharing with me. If anyone has any similar stories about signs that their loved ones have given them, especially before you know that your loved one has passed, I would love to hear those if you would be kind enough to share them with me. Thank you. Ouija Board in Haunted Childhood Home by Daddyo. At the end of May 1987, while my parents were on vacation, I was taking care of the haunted house I had lived in from 1979 till 1985. By this time, the poltergeist activity had decreased to almost nothing, but I was still scared to be in the house alone, especially at night. I called a friend of mine and asked him if he would mind staying there with me when he could while my parents were gone. I had told him quite a few stories about the activity in that house and barn in the past, so I used the possibility of a paranormal encounter to lure him into staying. He, fortunately for him, had never experienced anything he would consider paranormal before, but was still interested and not skeptical, so he agreed to stay the night. While I was waiting for him to arrive, my brother called to see if I was going to be staying there that night so he could hang out with his friends. I confirmed that I was, and also told him I was having my friend over to possibly have his first paranormal experience. My brother thought that was a good idea, so he decided to mention that to his friends to see if they wanted to join for an experience of their own. One of his friends had a Ouija board. and thought that was a great place to try it out. So they agreed. My brother arrived with his 2 friends first, and we walked around outside telling his friends about experiences we had there and in the barn. One of his friends was a skeptic, so he wasn't believing anything me and my brother were talking about. The other was like my friend. He hadn't experienced anything in his life, but still had an open mind. While we were talking, my friend finally arrived, so I went to his car to greet him. He had his girlfriend with him, so I asked if he was still planning on staying the night. He said yes, as long as his girlfriend could stay as well. I didn't mind as long as she was aware of my reason for having him stay. I told her that strange things may happen that night that might be scary to someone who has never had those experiences before. She was also a skeptic, so she agreed to stay, saying nothing was going to happen anyway. While my brother and his friends were still outside, I took my friend and his girlfriend upstairs to show him where they could sleep. After showing them, I started telling stories about the house to prepare them for what could possibly happen during the night. The only thing I was expecting would happen was the attic door would shake and make noise like it had done almost every night while I was living there. We went into the attic so I could show them what was in there while still talking about past experiences in the house and barn. There was a stack of old encyclopedias on the floor that was in disarray, with one on the floor. I picked up the one from the floor and placed it on top of the stack, and then straightened up the stack while finishing my stories of past experiences. Afterward, I went back downstairs to see what my brother was doing. My friend stayed upstairs with his girlfriend, so they could be alone. When I got downstairs, I saw they had already set up the Ouija board on the table and even had a few candles on the table around it. The table was in the dining room at the bottom of the stairs. I closed the stairway door and sat down in the empty chair in front of me, facing away from the door. My brother and his 2 friends were already sitting in the other chairs. We lit the candles, put our fingers on the planchette, and began asking questions. The planchette was moving with all our hands on it, answering our questions. I wasn't moving it, but I did think someone in our group was. I didn't believe Ouija boards were anything more than a novelty. While playing with the board, we heard someone walking on the stairs, which caused all 4 of us to look at the stairway door. I didn't think anything of it since my friend and his girlfriend were still upstairs. I just figured they were coming down. But after a little time, he hadn't opened the door. So I opened the door and saw he wasn't there. I then went up and asked him if he had gone down the stairs, and he told me that him and his girlfriend hadn't moved from the couch they were sitting on. He told me that he thought one of us was coming upstairs because they heard it also. 6 people heard someone walking on the stairs when there was no one on the stairs. My brother's skeptical friend was getting really spooked after that. We had to convince him not to just leave. His other friend was intrigued, like it was the coolest thing he'd experienced up to that point. My brother and I were used to that sort of thing, so it didn't faze us at all. After convincing his friend to stay, we went back to playing with the Ouija board. It was answering questions again, and I still thought somebody was moving the planchette. Then the intrigued friend asked whatever was answering to put out one of the candles. Within 5 seconds, one of the candles just burned out. There was no moving air in the room, plus all the other candles were still burning without any motion indicating moving air. The spooked, skeptical friend screamed and started running for the door, still screaming. The other friend followed him, and my brother after that. I shouldn't have been, but I was laughing at the guy's reaction. Even though it was spooky, I never expected a big guy like him to scream like that. I went outside to find my brother's friends getting into the car to leave. I said we can't stop without saying goodbye on the Ouija board just in case the superstition is true. My brother's friends were not willing to go back in the house, though. So my brother and I went in and said the goodbye. They left right after that without the Ouija board. I went back inside and blew out the remaining candles. Then I went upstairs to tell my friend and his girlfriend what just happened, since I knew they had to have heard the screaming. We sat upstairs talking until nighttime. Nothing happened until after midnight, when the attic door began moving. Like I mentioned before, this was a usual occurrence in that house, so I was used to it. My friend's girlfriend was getting really scared by this, though. She didn't believe things like this could happen, and here it was, happening. It took a bit of convincing to get her to stay, but she did at that point. The attic door was shaking and making noise the whole time. After a bit of time, there was a loud noise that came from inside the attic that sounded like something being dragged across the floor. Then the sound of knocking from within. Once again, we had to talk his girlfriend into not leaving, even while the door rattling and knocking was still going on. After a few minutes, there was a loud thud that sounded like someone had dropped a book flat onto the wooden floor. That was it for his girlfriend. There was no talking her into staying now. She ran downstairs with us right behind her. She told my friend she would be back to pick him up in the morning, and she left. We went back inside and slept downstairs. When we got up, I just had to look in the attic to see where that loud noise came from. When I looked in, the first thing I noticed was the stack of encyclopedias was no longer straightened up, and the one I picked up was right back on the floor. I can't say for sure if any of this was brought on by the Ouija board, but that was more occurrences in one day witnessed by more people than there had ever been in that house before. Daddyo, thank you so much for giving me permission to read this story. I love all of your stories. There's something just so chef's kiss about scary stories that happened in the 90s, the 80s, and then earlier. Something about the analog nature of life back then and how it just, those kind of ghost stories are different. Those kinds of scary stories just hit differently for me, and I love them. I love a modern story too. It's a different vibe. And I also happen to love Ouija board stories or Ouija board stories. I love them. They have always fascinated and terrified me. So it lived up to everything I was expecting when I saw it was about Ouija boards. So I cannot even begin to imagine that I would have ever agreed to stay in that house. So your friend's girlfriend, who she held on for a while. I'm going to give it to her. She held on for a while. She held on longer than your brother's friends, which, I mean, I really can't blame them for running. I do love how the skeptic is like, oh no, I got to get out of here. Like, then it's the animated like Scooby-Doo running sound, like this is running in place, trying to get out quickly. I love that. The attic door just a daily occurrence that it's rattling. I know you have told us about the hauntings, the activity in your house and the barn. I know. And everyone that's listening, please go back a few episodes because Daddyo has had a story. And I think this is the 3rd or 4th episode he's had a story in. So go back and listen to some of the crazy stuff that happened in his house growing up and especially in the barn on the property. But I know, Daddyo, that you have talked about all of the crazy stuff that happens, and yet I don't know how you lived with a rattling attic door every single night, especially every night. That's crazy. And then as soon as you were telling us about stacking the encyclopedias, as soon as you mentioned stacking them, I was like, oh no, what's going to happen with the encyclopedia? It's going to fall and be really loud. And then that did happen. Super scary. So here's what I find especially interesting about Ouija boards is when they first showed up in the late 19th century, which is like 1890s, they were really, it was a novelty. It was just a fun game. If they took it seriously, they took it seriously through the lens of spiritualism, which was around the mid 19th century. So mid 1800s. That was, you had spiritualism, you had seances. It was totally normal. Nobody thought it was from the devil, of the devil. Nobody thought it was demonic. Nobody thought it was satanic. I mean, even if you look at, there's an I Love Lucy episode. So that was like in the 50s. There's an I Love Lucy episode where they have a seance. I think there's even a Ouija board. So it wasn't satanic back then. What made it satanic, along with a lot of other things, and this is a whole nother conversation that I will happily delve into at a future date, but what made us associate Ouija boards with demonic activity was the movie The Exorcist, 1973. And so if you haven't seen The Exorcist, the main character, I don't know, is she the main character? Reagan. She plays with a Ouija board in the beginning of the movie, and she talks to who she says is a person called Captain Howdy. And then from there, she becomes possessed, and then yada, 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 split pea soup, spinning head, you know the drill. So from that point, which was a really scary movie, like I still think it's scary, especially those like flashes of that face in the darkness. It was especially terrifying to me when I was younger, and I was not young. I was not born yet when the movie came out, but I was a teenager when I first saw it, and it terrified me. And I think it probably terrified a lot of other people. And so that might be why we associate. Maybe that's why it happened. It was so scary. So The Exorcist comes out. We then associate Ouija boards with evil entities. But prior to that, it was just a fun game. Like, I would be curious to know if anyone has stories from their parents or their grandparents about playing with a Ouija board and having an experience like we hear now. Nowadays, someone uses Ouija board or even mention a Ouija board. Listen, get a group of people together, just a random assortment of people, and ask them if they would play Ouija board with you, if you brought it out. If you had a Ouija board, would they touch it? And I guarantee you are going to see visceral reactions in people, even people who aren't necessarily religious, even people who may call themselves skeptics. They do not want to mess with a Ouija board. They're terrified of it, and they probably can't really tell you why. And of course, you can't talk about Ouija boards, or at least I can't talk about Ouija boards without talking about the ideomotor reflex, which is what the scientific explanation is for how a Ouija board works. So it's basically minuscule, unconscious movement that you are not even aware of, but you are primed for it, and your brain is expecting an answer. And so it moves your muscles without really asking you. You're not even aware of it. That's probably a terrible explanation, but you know what? I'm not a scientist. I am a madam of the strangest of ways. So we're going to just leave it there. That's how it works. So you're not purposely moving it. No one is purposely moving it. Well, maybe your jerk friend is purposely moving it, but let's say everybody's on the straight and narrow. They are all saying they're not moving it. No, they're not. And I read something about this fascinating study that was done by researchers at the University of British Columbia's Visual Cognition Lab. So in a Ouija nutshell, what they did was they had participants blindfolded playing the Ouija board with another person. However, the other player was working for the researchers, and quickly and quietly, the quote unquote other participant would take their fingers off the planchette. So it was only the test participants who were actually playing on the Ouija board. There was no one else with their hand on the Ouija board. And the people that were part of the test actually complained that the other person was pushing the planchette too hard. So clearly they really thought the other person was playing Ouija with them. So, okay, so that's not the test, right? But that is actually terrifying if you consider that actually there were spirits talking through the board and that's what they were feeling, pushing on the planchette. So that's scary. So here's what happened in the research, though. Here's what happened in the test was they asked them questions that had answers that they could actually prove. Like is the capital of Brazil Rio de Janeiro? And when the participants guessed verbally answers to questions without the Ouija board, they got the answers right about 50% of the time, which is what you would expect in a guessing scenario. That's pretty standard, totally normal. However, when they are asked the questions, different questions, when they're asked different questions and they're using the Ouija board to receive the answers from some other plane of existence, from beyond the veil, let's say, suddenly their guesses are correct upwards of 65% of the time. That's an increase of 15% accuracy purely because they believe that they are getting the answer from somewhere else where the answer would be right and where the spirit would actually have the correct answer. Is that not just wild? So there's two ways to look at it. One is that, well, they actually were communing with spirits using the Ouija board, and these spirits just happened to be trivia pros, and they did actually know what the capital cities of South American countries are, which I would have to wager most American ghosts probably don't know. I mean, I'm just going to say they probably don't know. But assuming that they do know, or that spirits just have access to trivia at their fingertips, maybe they can access the internet quickly. So maybe that's a possibility. So that's one option, is that actually they were communing with spirits who do just actually happen to know world geography and or trivia, or that we know more than we think we do, but we just don't trust ourselves. And we do put trust in the thought that something bigger than us or something outside of us has more wisdom, carries more weight, is more right. We don't trust ourselves, but we do trust in some other capital O other trademark symbol. We trust the capital O other trademark symbol more than we trust ourselves. So bringing this back, Daddyo, to your Ouija experience, I doubt we'll ever know what questions you asked, because having played Ouija board when I was a teenager, I don't remember what the questions were. But the fact that when y'all asked it to put a candle out, that the candle went out, and then you heard something on the stairs, and the people upstairs also heard something on the stairs, and then no one was on the stairs. I mean, that's not the ideomotor effect. I don't know what that is, besides very scary. But very smart of you to remember to go end the session and say goodbye. Though, considering the activity that you already had in that house and in the barn, to me, whatever that Ouija board might have woken up, to me, it would be like when you introduce a fish into a tank of other fish and among those other fish are fish that eat the fish that you just put in. So I think that the spirits that were already in your house would have eaten the spirit that the Ouija board let in, like for lunch. I mean, so maybe worst case scenario, the spirits that were already there got some energy because they got a little demon snack. Luckily, no demon snacks here. Thank you so much for listening. Remember, you can feel afraid and not be in danger. Please remember to like and subscribe. It means a lot. Until next time.